The massive white dog lunged forward with unexpected force, nearly pulling the nurse off her feet as he barked frantically at the doctor who was about to inject something into his unconscious owner's foreline. The Dogo Argentino's teeth were bared, his powerful body trembling with intensity as he positioned himself between the medical staff and Marco's hospital bed. Something was terribly wrong, and Atlas knew it. "What's gotten into him?" the startled nurse exclaimed, struggling to control the dog that had been perfectly calm just seconds earlier. The doctor froze, syringe in hand. Confusion edged across his face. Then his eyes widened as he looked down at the medication label. "Wait, this isn't... Oh my God." Before we continue, if you enjoy incredible stories about the extraordinary bond between humans and their loyal canine companions, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much. And let's continue. They say dogs can sense things humans can't: danger, illness, even death. But what happened in room 342 of Mercy General Hospital that autumn afternoon wasn't just about a dog's heightened senses. It was about an unbreakable bond between a man and the dog who refused to say goodbye. Marco Alvarez hadn't always been a dog person. Growing up in a cramped apartment in Buenos Aires, pets were a luxury his family couldn't afford, but life had taken him far from those humble beginnings. At 42, he had built a successful construction company in San Diego, with enough space and resources to finally have the dog he'd secretly always wanted. The decision to adopt Atlas hadn't been planned. Marco had been driving home from a difficult meeting with clients when he passed the animal shelter. Something made him pull over. Perhaps it was stress, perhaps fate. Inside, most of the dogs barked excitedly as he walked down the row of kennels, but not the massive white Dogo Argentino in the corner kennel. The muscular dog simply watched him with intelligent, amber eyes that seemed to look straight through Marco's carefully constructed facade. "That one's scheduled to be put down tomorrow," the shelter worker said, noticing Marco's interest. He was rescued from a fighting ring. No one wants to take a chance on him. Marco knew what it felt like to be judged by your past, by circumstances beyond your control. Without overthinking it, he signed the adoption papers that afternoon. The first few weeks weren't easy. Atlas had scars, both physical and emotional. He was wary, sometimes skittish, occasionally defensive. But Marco was patient, consistent. He'd built his business from nothing. He knew that worthwhile things took time. Their breakthrough came during a violent thunderstorm 3 months after the adoption. Marco woke to find Atlas trembling beside his bed, eyes wild with fear at each crack of thunder. Without hesitation, Marco lifted the heavy dog onto the bed beside him. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, stroking the dog's short white coat. "We're both survivors, you and me. We look out for each other now." From that night forward, they were inseparable. Atlas transformed into a different dog, confident, gentle, fiercely loyal. He accompanied Marco to construction sites where workers initially gave the imposing breed a wide berth, only to later slip him treats when they thought Marco wasn't looking. At home, Atlas was Marco's shadow, a comforting presence during long evenings reviewing blueprints and bids. "That dog watches you like you're the center of the universe," Marco's sister Elena commented during a visit. "I've never seen anything like it." Marco would just smile. "He knows I'd do the same for him." Neither of them could have predicted how prophetic those words would become. The headaches started in the spring, mild at first, then increasingly debilitating. Marco dismissed them as stress until the morning he collapsed in his kitchen while making coffee. Atlas found him, licked his face until he regained consciousness, then stayed pressed against him until Marco managed to call an ambulance. The diagnosis was devastating: glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor. Marco listened numbly as the neurologist explained treatment options, statistics, timelines. Surgery was scheduled immediately, followed by radiation and chemotherapy. The prognosis was guarded at best. Through it all, Atlas seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. The normally energetic dog became gentler, more attentive. He would rest his massive head on Marco's lap during chemotherapy sessions at home, his warm weight somehow making the nausea and fatigue more bearable. Elena moved in to help, taking Atlas for his walks and caring for Marco on his worst days. She noticed how the dog would often sniff at Marco's head, particularly on the side where the tumor was growing. "It's like he's trying to diagnose you himself," she said one evening as they watched a movie. Atlas wedged between them on the couch. Marco ran his hand over the dog's broad head. "Maybe he's just trying to understand why I smell like chemicals these days." But they both knew it was more than that. Research had shown that some dogs could detect certain cancers through scent. Atlas seemed hyper-aware of Marco's condition, sometimes whining softly when Marco's pain increased, often before Marco himself had registered the change. 6 months into treatment, the tumor stopped responding to therapy. Marco's oncologist, Dr. Patel, recommended an experimental treatment protocol, one that would require an extended hospital stay. "What about my dog?" was Marco's first question. Dr. Patel hesitated. "I'm afraid pets aren't allowed in the treatment ward." "Dinno pes," Marco said firmly. It took Elena and Dr. Patel hours to convince him otherwise. Finally, a compromise was reached. The hospital would allow brief, supervised visits from Atlas if Marco agreed to the treatment. "He needs to see me," Marco insisted. "He'll think I've abandoned him otherwise." What he didn't say was that he needed to see Atlas too, that the thought of facing this final battle without his loyal companion was unbearable. The experimental treatment was brutal. Marco's immune system fought the genetically modified virus designed to attack the cancer cells, leaving him feverish and delirious. His weight dropped alarmingly, his once robust frame becoming frail. Only on his more lucid days was Atlas permitted to visit, carefully bathed by Elena beforehand and wearing a special therapy dog vest that Dr. Patel had arranged. During these visits, Atlas would lie quietly beside Marco's bed, occasionally lifting his head to lick Marco's limp hand. Hospital staff, who had initially been skeptical about allowing such a large dog into the facility, were won over by Atlas's gentle demeanor. "That dog understands what's happening better than some humans do," Nurse Jackie commented after witnessing Atlas gently nuzzling Marco's hand during a particularly difficult day. It was Nurse Jackie who advocated for Atlas when Marco's condition deteriorated further. The cancer had spread despite the experimental treatment, and Dr. Patel had reluctantly moved Marco to palliative care. The prognosis was now measured in days, not months. "If it were my loved one," she argued to the hospital administration, "I'd want their dog with them at the end. It's the humane thing to do for both of them." Permission was granted for Atlas to stay in Marco's room, a rare exception to hospital policy. Elena brought the dog's bed from home, placing it beside Marco's hospital bed. Atlas immediately settled into it, his eyes rarely leaving Marco's face. As Marco drifted in and out of consciousness, healthcare workers witnessed something extraordinary. Atlas seemed to know when pain medications were needed before Marco could press the call button. The dog would rise, place his paws on the bed rail, and whine softly until someone checked on his owner. "I've been a nurse for 25 years, Jackie told a colleague, "and I've never seen anything like it. That dog is more attentive than some of our monitors." By the 7th day of Atlas's hospital vigil, Marco was largely unresponsive, kept comfortable with a morphine drip. Dr. Patel had prepared Elena for the inevitable, explaining that it was now just a matter of time. Atlas refused to leave his post, accepting food and water only when Elena brought it directly to him, taking brief bathroom breaks only when coaxed. It was during one of these breaks, while Elena had taken Atlas to a small courtyard outside, that a new doctor entered Marco's room. Dr. Warner was covering for Dr. Patel, who had been called away for a family emergency. He reviewed Marco's chart briefly, making notes about the current medication regimen. When Elena returned with Atlas, Dr. Warner introduced himself and explained that he was making some adjustments to Marco's pain management protocol. "His breathing is becoming more labored," he explained professionally. "I'm going to administer an increased dose of morphine to ensure he remains comfortable." Elena nodded, too emotionally exhausted to question the doctor's assessment. Atlas, however, seemed unusually agitated upon re-entering the room. He sniffed the air, his muscles tensing as he looked at the unfamiliar doctor. "He's just not used to you," Elena apologized. struggling to keep the massive dog calm as he pulled against his leash. Dr. Warner nodded dismissively. "Not a problem. I'll be quick." He prepared the injection, measuring out the medication with practiced efficiency. As he approached Marco's foreline, syringe in hand, Atlas suddenly transformed from anxious to aggressive. The dog lunged forward with a ferocity Elena had never witnessed, nearly pulling her off her feet as he barked frantically at the doctor. The massive white dog positioned himself between the doctor and Marco's bed. Cheeks bared, his powerful body trembling with intensity. The message was clear. The doctor would not touch Marco. "What's gotten into him?" Elena exclaimed, struggling to control the 100-pound dog that had been perfectly gentle just moments before. Dr. Warner froze, syringe in hand. Confusion edged across his face. Then his eyes widened as he looked down at the medication label. "Wait, this isn't. Oh my God." The commotion brought Nurse Jackie running into the room. She took in the scene instantly. The agitated dog, the startled doctor, the syringe in his hand. "What's happening here?" she demanded, professional instinct overriding her usual deference to physicians. Dr. Warner stammered, still staring at the syringe. "I grabbed the wrong medication. This is potassium chloride, not morphine." The implication hung in the air like a physical presence. Potassium chloride, in the dose he had prepared, would have stopped Marco's heart instantly. It would have appeared as a natural end to a terminal patient. It was an honest mistake, Dr. Warner insisted, his face pale. "The vials look similar, and I'm not familiar with where things are kept on this floor." Nurse Jackie's eyes narrowed as she took the syringe from him. "I'll need to report this immediately. This kind of mistake is inexcusable." Elena stood frozen, still gripping Atlas's leash, trying to process what had just happened. The dog had calmed somewhat but remained vigilant. His eyes locked on the doctor. "How did he know?" she whispered, looking down at Atlas with newfound awe. How could he possibly have known? The investigation that followed revealed disturbing facts about Dr. Warner. He wasn't supposed to be covering for Dr. Patel at all. He had falsified credentials to gain access to the palliative care ward. His real name was Thomas Warner, and he had been previously investigated for suspicious deaths at 2 other hospitals, though charges had never been filed due to insufficient evidence. The hospital security footage showed Warner entering several other patients' rooms before Marco's, spending just minutes with each. 3 elderly patients had died during his unauthorized shift, deaths that were now being carefully reviewed by medical examiners. Marco, however, had survived, all because of Atlas's inexplicable intervention. Dogs have up to 300 million olfactory receptors in their noses, compared to about 6 million in humans. The hospital's risk management director explained to Elena days later. "A Dogo Argentino like Atlas has an extraordinary sense of smell. He likely detected chemical compounds in the medication that were different from what he was used to smelling around Marco." But Elena wasn't entirely convinced by the scientific explanation. She had witnessed something that transcended simple biology, a connection between Marco and Atlas that defied rational explanation. Word of Atlas's heroic intervention spread throughout the hospital and beyond. Local news picked up the story, dubbing Atlas the guardian angel with paws. Animal behavior experts weighed in on television segments, offering theories about canine intuition and protective instincts. Through it all, Atlas remained by Marco's side, unaffected by his newfound fame. And remarkably, Marco began to show signs of improvement. Whether motivated by his narrow escape or some other factor, his condition stabilized in the days following the incident. "It's not a recovery," Dr. Patel cautioned when she returned. "The cancer is still terminal, but he seems to be rallying somewhat." This modest improvement was enough for Dr. Patel to approve Marco's request to go home for his final days. "Quality over quantity," she said gently. "I think you'll both be happier there." The journey home was bittersweet. Marco, now confined to a wheelchair, sat with his hand resting on Atlas's back as Elena drove. The dog remained pressed against Marco's legs, his vigilance undiminished by the change in setting. Back in the familiar surroundings of his home, with the scent of the ocean breeze drifting through open windows. Marco seemed to find new reserves of strength. He still spent most of his time in the hospital bed that had been set up in his living room, but he was more alert, more present. I think he was just hanging on until he could get home, Elena confided to Nurse Jackie, who had volunteered to help with Marco's home care. This is where he wants to be for the end. Atlas rarely left Marco's side, seeming to understand the gravity of these final days together. He would rest his head gently on the edge of the bed, his eyes conveying a depth of emotion that often brought visitors to tears. Word of Marco and Atlas's story continued to spread. The local community rallied around them, dropping off meals, sending cards, offering support to Elena. A professional photographer volunteered to capture portraits of Marco and Atlas together, images that Elena would later treasure. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Marco asked to be wheeled onto the back porch. Atlas followed, settling beside the wheelchair as Marco gazed out at the horizon. "Gino," Marco said softly to Elena, his voice weak but clear. "When I adopted him, everyone thought I was saving him." He reached down to stroke Atlas's broad head. "But I think we both know who saved him." 3 days later, with Atlas curled beside him on the bed and Elena holding his hand, Marco Alvarez took his final breath. Unlike his near death in the hospital, this passing was peaceful, surrounded by love and free from fear. Atlas seemed to understand immediately. He gently licked Marco's hand one last time, then let out a soft whine that broke Elena's heart anew. The following days were difficult. Atlas would search the house, checking Marco's empty bedroom, waiting by the front door. Elena, dealing with her own grief, found comfort in caring for the dog who had loved her brother so completely. "He misses him as much as I do," she told Dr. Patel, who had come to pay her respects. "I don't know how to help him understand. Just give him time," Dr. Patel advised. "And love. Dogs grieve too." The funeral was well attended, a testament to the lives Marco had touched. Many were surprised to see Atlas there, wearing a special black bandana, sitting perfectly behaved beside Elena in the front row. The funeral director had initially objected, but relented when shown news articles about Atlas's role in extending Marco's life. During the service, several people mentioned Atlas in their eulogies, how the dog had transformed Marco, how their bond had exemplified unconditional love in its purest form. Elena herself spoke of how Atlas had not only given Marco companionship, but had ultimately protected him when he was most vulnerable. "My brother always said that when he adopted Atlas, he was giving him a second chance at life," Elena said, her voice breaking with emotion. But Atlas gave Marco something even more precious: dignity and safety in his final days, and more time to say goodbye on his own terms. As Marco's casket was lowered into the ground, Atlas watched quietly, his usual energy subdued as if he understood the finality of this moment. When Elena placed a rose on the casket, Atlas gently dropped the tennis ball that had been Marco's last gift to him. The gathered mourners wiped away tears at the simple, heartbreaking gesture of goodbye. In the months that followed, Atlas adjusted gradually to life without Marco. Elena had moved permanently into Marco's house, unable to bear the thought of removing Atlas from the home he had shared with his beloved owner. The dog still had moments of searching, of waiting, but they became less frequent as time passed. What surprised Elena most was how Atlas seemed to have found a new purpose. The hospital where Marco had been treated had reached out about their therapy dog program, wondering if Atlas might be suitable given his remarkable behavior during Marco's illness. After extensive training and certification, Atlas began visiting patients in the palliative care ward. His gentle demeanor and intuitive understanding of human suffering made him exceptionally well-suited to the role. Patients who rarely responded to human visitors would light up when Atlas entered their rooms, placing his head gently on their beds, offering silent companionship. "He seems to know exactly who needs him most," the program coordinator marveled, "and he's especially attentive to patients who are nearing the end." On one memorable occasion, Atlas refused to leave a patient's room, exhibiting the same agitation he had shown the day he prevented Dr. Warner's lethal injection. When staff investigated, they discovered the patient's oxygen levels were dangerously low, due to a malfunctioning monitor. Once again, Atlas had detected something the medical equipment had missed. Dr. Patel, who had followed Atlas's therapy dog journey with interest, wasn't entirely surprised. There's growing scientific evidence that dogs can detect physiological changes in humans, changes in breath compounds, subtle shifts in body chemistry. But with Atlas, I think there's something more, something we can't quite measure or define. A year after Marco's death, Alina established the Marco Alvarez Foundation, dedicated to training rescue dogs for therapy work and supporting animal-assisted therapy programs in hospice settings. Atlas became the face of the foundation, his story inspiring donations and volunteers. The foundation also collaborated with medical researchers studying canine detection abilities, particularly in healthcare settings. Atlas participated in several studies, his extraordinary sensory capabilities helping scientists better understand the potential for dogs to serve as early warning systems for medical emergencies. The man who had once been told by Thomas Warner was eventually tracked down in Nevada, using yet another false identity. His arrest and subsequent trial brought closure to multiple families who had lost loved ones under suspicious circumstances in palliative care settings. Atlas's intervention had not only saved Marco from becoming another victim, but had ultimately stopped a serial killer who had operated undetected in the healthcare system for years. When Atlas received the American Humane Hero Dog Award, the ceremony was broadcast nationally. Elena accepted on his behalf, the massive white dog sitting regally beside her on stage. Atlas reminds us that the bonds we form with animals can transcend our understanding, she said, her hand resting on Atlas's broad back. My brother once told me that in saving Atlas, he found purpose. But I think their story shows us something even more profound, that sometimes those we rescue end up rescuing us in ways we could never imagine. As she spoke, Atlas gazed out at the audience with those same intelligent amber eyes that had once captivated Marco in that shelter kennel years ago. He was older now, with touches of gray around his muzzle, but still powerful, still regal. When Elena and Atlas returned to Marco's grave after the ceremony, placing the medal beside the headstone, a gentle breeze rustled the flowers they had brought. Atlas sat beside the grave, his posture alert but peaceful, as if keeping watch. Elena often wondered what Atlas remembered of Marco, how he had processed the loss. Animal behaviors told her that dogs live primarily in the present, that their concept of death differs from human understanding. But watching Atlas in moments like these, she wasn't so sure. You still miss him too, don't you? She whispered, kneeling beside the dog. Atlas turned to her, resting his head against her shoulder in what felt remarkably like an embrace. 3 years after Marco's passing, the Marco Alvarez Foundation had grown beyond Elena's wildest expectations. Therapy dog programs had been established in hospitals across the country, with special emphasis on palliative care settings. Research funded by the foundation had led to breakthroughs in understanding canine detection of human illness, with several medical facilities implementing pilot programs using specially trained dogs as supplementary monitoring for at-risk patients. Atlas, now approaching senior status for his breed, had scaled back his therapy visits but still made weekly appearances at Mercy General, where his legend had only grown with time. New staff members were told his story during orientation, and a portrait of Atlas with Marco hung in the hospital's main lobby beneath the words, compassion, vigilance, loyalty. On the anniversary of Marco's death each year, Elena and Atlas would spend the day at the beach that Marco had loved. They would walk along the shore, Atlas still dignified despite his graying muzzle and slightly slower pace. They would sit watching the waves, sharing a quiet moment of remembrance. It was during one of these memorial days, as the sun was setting over the Pacific, that Elena realized Atlas was struggling more than usual. His breathing seemed labored, his usual energy diminished. Concerned, she took him to the veterinary hospital the following morning. The diagnosis was heartbreaking hemangiosarcoma, an aggressive cancer that had already spread throughout Atlas's body. The prognosis was poor, with perhaps weeks remaining. We can make him comfortable, the veterinarian said gently. But at his age and with the advanced state of the disease, treatment would only prolong his suffering. Elena understood immediately what needed to be done. In the days that followed, she created a bucket list for Atlas, his favorite parks, reaches, foods he'd rarely been allowed. Friends from the hospital came to say their goodbyes, many bringing special treats or toys. On Atlas's final day, Elena took him to Marco's grave one last time. The massive dog seemed to understand the significance, lying down beside the headstone with a deep sigh that spoke volumes. "You found each other when you needed it most," Elena told him, stroking his white coat. "And now it's time for you to find each other again." Later that afternoon, with Elena cradling his massive head and the kind veterinarian administering the injection that would end his suffering, Atlas closed his amber eyes for the final time. His passing was peaceful, dignified, a fitting end for a dog who had lived with such purpose and love. The impact of Atlas's life extended far beyond those who had known him personally. The research he had participated in continued to influence medical practices. The foundation named for his owner continued to rescue dogs and train them for therapy work. The hospital where he had saved Marco established an annual award in his name, recognizing exceptional acts of compassion and vigilance among staff. But perhaps his greatest legacy was more personal, summed up by Nurse Jackie at the memorial service held in his honor at Mercy General Hospital. Atlas showed us that sometimes the most profound healing doesn't come from medicine or technology, she said, her voice thick with emotion. It comes from a connection so deep that it transcends what science can explain. It comes from love in its purest form. Elena chose to bury Atlas's ashes beside Marco's grave. The headstone, already etched with Marco's name and dates, received a simple addition: "In Atlas is faithful guardian. Together in life, together beyond." In the years that followed, hospital staff and patients would sometimes report peculiar occurrences in the palliative care ward. The sound of nails clicking on tile floors when no dog was present. The sensation of a large, warm presence beside beds of those nearing the end, bringing comfort in the darkest hours. Skeptics dismissed these stories as imagination, as the human tendency to find meaning in coincidence. But those who had known Atlas, who had witnessed the extraordinary bond between a man and the dog who had refused to let him go too soon, wondered if perhaps some connections are simply too powerful to be severed by death. Elena liked to think so. On the anniversary of both their passings, she would visit the grave they shared, leaving 2 items: a single rose for her brother, and a tennis ball for the dog who had loved him beyond all reason. Some people never find a love that deep in their whole lives. She would tell the therapy dogs she continued to train in Atlas's memory. But if you're lucky enough to find it, it changes you forever. And somewhere, perhaps, a man and his dog walk together again, no longer separated by the limitations of illness or marked by the scars of difficult beginnings. Just 2 souls who found each other against all odds, whose connection transcended understanding, and whose story continues to remind us of the extraordinary power of the bonds we forge with those who share our journey. Whether they walk on 2 legs or 4,